So this is the final video for this course, and I know many of you are very excited because you won't have to hear my voice anymore. But this is chapters 11 through 13, and I bundle this as going forward. Now that you've kind of got a curriculum unit done, what do you do from here? You just kind of do the exact same thing over and over again until you've bundled every single thing? Well, probably not. So chapter 11 talks about the design process, and the big idea for chapter 11 is that we've been very regimented this semester because this was a brand new to many of you, and counterintuitive for some of you as well. So we did our understandings, then we wrote them. We talked about EQs, then we wrote them. We talked about assessment, then we wrote it, and so on and so forth. So you might now decide when you get out there and start working on your own stuff a lot more in depth, you might say, well, why can't I do my understandings and EQs together? Well, you can. Well, why can't I start with the content standards and write EQs to that? Well, you can. So that's kind of the point. Within reason, you can do the steps in a different order and do what feels right, and that might change unit to unit for you. But the one thing I will caution you in the within reason is that when you start with the lesson plans, you kind of lose that whole point of UBD in the process. So I wouldn't start there, but feel free to do it within reason. Now, how do you start? If you don't just kind of follow this regimented path, what are other ways you could start with instead of just pulling big ideas out of the air? Well, the first one's probably the one that most of you are going to do. That's content standards, Common Core. The problem is in the past, when we had Common Core, well, before Common Core, we had our GLEs and things like that. And if we had 35 things to teach in math, I would say, okay, I need to teach number 1, then I'll teach number 2, then I'll teach number 3, and so on and so forth. So I was teaching 35 isolated things. Take a bunch of those content standards, look at them as a big picture, come up with some big ideas that might incorporate 4, 5, 6 of them at once. And so then the time it used to take you enough time to teach 1 or 2 of those, you've now taught 5 or 6. So try to figure out ways to bundle a lot of those content standards into one unit. That's a great place to start because those content standards are, yes, you're going to have to teach to those. So why not make a big unit out of many of them and knock a bunch of them out at the same time? Another place you can start is with real-world applications. If you want students to learn how to use a checking account, that's a great place to start. Develop some big ideas, some EQs and understandings from that point. A key resource or favorite activity. Back when I taught 5th grade many moons ago, we had a career day, and we were kind of all teaching our own things, and some teachers were better than me about teaching to that and getting students prepared for that. But it was this great activity, and I just kind of would say, okay guys, tomorrow's career day, don't forget. And it was very isolated. I could have done a lot to build students up for this kind of activity, be it in writing or in career preparation or things like that. There were a lot of things I could have done to build up to that activity. So if you have something like that, figure out a way to take a lot of those content standards and build up to that favorite activity. You might look at an important skill or a key assessment or something you've already got, and this is a big one too, the existing units. If you already have been teaching units, don't sit there and say, well, got to start from scratch. No. Figure out how you can modify that unit. You might take out some activities and replace them with other things. You might add other things to it. You might combine a few units, but there's no need to start from scratch. So those are some ways you can start with a new unit as you go forward. The big thing is there, don't reinvent the wheel. What they did on pages 260 and then 262 through 266, great graphics there, because what they do is they take a few units that were done by somebody using a traditional method and then showed how they could easily be modified into UBD. You'll see that there are some drastic changes, but the overall framework is still basically the same. You're still going to be teaching the same thing, so don't just take everything and throw it out, say, got to start over. Use that stuff that you've already had before, because chances are, unless you were following a textbook, you were probably doing some great things, so don't lose it. And then one of the other things in the design process, this comes up a lot with some very traditional people, if they're not in this course and they're just kind of talking about this like in their district or something like that, is that UBD kind of it inhibits those teachable moments because you're so regimented and you've got to follow this process to make these units, and then you've scripted everything pretty well out and there's no room for teachable moment. I would say if you're doing it that way, you're doing it wrong. The bottom line is you should still have those teachable moments, because what you've done is you've opened the class up for deeper thought by having those big those big questions, those essential questions, those important things you're asking at the beginning of the class, in the middle of the class, and you're kind of going deeper than you did before. What that's going to do, it's going to cause students to think differently, think deeper, and then you're going to have more teachable moments rather than less. So you're going to have other things come up that have never come up before because your students are thinking differently, and that's a good thing. So then we get into the big picture. What we did was we kind of took a little snippet. We took a little piece, 2 weeks out of your 40 for the entire year. And what they talk about in chapter 12 is how to use this same methodology for your entire school year. And, start there sometimes. Now, if I would have done that in this class, I probably would have had a mutiny on board and been run out of town on a rail. But what you can do is you can take this and you can take your entire, if you teach math for 7th grade, you can plan out your entire year using UBD. And what you do is you start with your course foundations. Those are your understanding and essential questions. When somebody walks out of your 7th grade math class, what should they be able to do? If you sit there and just start spouting out everything from the Common Core or your GLEs or your district's curriculum, you've got to be delusional to think that they're going to walk out of there being able to do every single thing like that right after they walk out of your room over that summer. Concentrate on what they should be able to do, a deeper understanding. What things should they do? Those are your understandings and essential questions. You start there, then you start looking at your performance tasks. Look at those things that they should be able to do, and then design things that would say, this is how I know they do, that they understand it. These are the things they'll be able to actually physically do. And then you start there and build some performance tasks and use the rubric methodology that you've used before to determine what that performance will really look like. What shows deep understanding? What shows a basic level of understanding, which in many cases might be exactly what you're looking for. So don't think that you have to have an Einstein coming out of every single student. You don't need every student to be Einstein. Sometimes you just need them to have that basic understanding, those basic tools, so that when they come back again in August with a new teacher, they haven't forgotten everything that they did before, which is a lot of times what I think we would all agree we see sometimes. So another thing we need to look at is the scope and sequence. And when we say scope and sequence, a lot of times what we'll see, well, we've got 12 chapters in the book, and so we've got to make sure we get through all the 12. That's not scope and sequence. Taking a look at individual skills is not scope and sequence. Taking a look at the big picture and saying, okay, after this milestone in the course, they'll be able to do this. At this milestone, they'll be able to do this. And just look at it from a performance standpoint for when you're designing your scope and sequence, rather than isolated skills that are forgotten on a day-to-day basis. Remember the difference between content and understanding content. A lot of times we look at content and we plan out based upon the content. Well, we gotta do one lesson a day, one skill a day, blah, blah, blah. This kind of goes back to what I've been talking about, but make sure that you're looking at the pace for understanding content. Some things are going to take longer than others, and if you have experience with that, unless you're a brand new teacher, which if you are, you'll learn really quickly, but if you're not, you kind of already know which areas you're going to have to spend more time on. Go ahead and start looking at that right away. And then finally, hooks in textbooks. We cannot underestimate the importance of the hook, of getting students engaged right off the bat. Now, that being said, look at how every textbook starts. It starts with basic definitions and an overview, and these are the basic things you need to know to understand everything that we're going to talk about. I would compare that to, when you go into any kind of training and they tell you 15 objectives right off the bat. As an adult learner, you understand that that's what they have to do. They tell you what you're going to learn, then they teach it to you, and then they remind you of what you learned. And that's fine. But as a student, when you're in a K-12 setting, that's really not engaging whatsoever. But that's how textbooks are. So break away from the textbooks. I know I've made that point several times in this course, but I cannot underestimate how important it is you break away from the textbook. Textbooks are not good at hooks. That's why you're there. You are there to get those students engaged. Those textbooks are references. They're encyclopedias. They're dictionaries, for lack of a better term. That's basically what they are. Now, The next thing that we're going to talk about is chapter 13. They talk about three major misconceptions. Whenever this comes up, we always hear that these big three misconceptions. And one of the first misconceptions is we have to teach to the test. We've got this big test. If we don't get X number of students at proficient or above, well, then everything gets shut down and we're all out of jobs and blah, blah, blah. So, I will tell you that I would compare this way of thinking to, let's say that you are going to the doctor for your annual physical. You're a little worried because guess what? You've not eaten very well this year, and you haven't really been exercising. You've had every intention of exercising, but you just haven't quite gotten to it. So, the week before you get to the doctor, you sit there and you starve yourself to lose some weight. You run every single day, and you think, yes, this is going to be great. Do you really think that's going to have any major effect on your physical? Is it going to affect your cholesterol, your blood pressure, your overall weight once you start drinking and eating again? No, this is a short-term thing that's probably not going to last. That is what we see in classrooms all the time. When we are covering content at a breakneck pace, and then we review all this stuff right before a test, and we start getting these sample test questions, that's what we're doing. It's the exact same thing as cramming for a physical. Sure, you might feel like you're walking in and are ready for it, but really, the numbers aren't going to lie. So, that being said, I want you to pause this as I pull up this quote here. This is probably my favorite quote in the entire textbook. So pause, please, and then when you're done reading it, go ahead and hit play again. So, what this is basically saying is that we have this theory that if we just teach to the test, our students are going to do better. We're going to do test prep, it's going to be better. Research actually shows that, first of all, this is not true, but secondly, that when you actually have authentic learning and authentic teaching going on, where students are actually applying information and taking the time to do it rather than quick objective skill hits, boom, 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 not only do you see better scores, but you also see those gaps decrease exponentially. The low-performing students rise up tremendously when they have a foundational knowledge. So when you try to teach to the test, you're really hurting your students, not helping them. So research shows exactly the opposite. Test prep doesn't work. So get that through there. The second misconception that we hear all the time that I've heard and I've said is we have too much content. We have too much to cover. There's just too much stuff. Well, where do we get first point is, where do we get that from? Well, most teachers will say, well, the principal would say, so we have to cover all this content. The district, we have to cover all this content. So my vision drastically changed when I went from teaching to principal. And when I was a principal, I never ever said to any teacher, well, you have to make sure you cover every single piece of this content because that is what's going to be on the test. Therefore, we need to make sure that we hit everything. It doesn't matter if they don't get it. I don't care if they don't get it or not. You have to make sure you cover it because that is more important than them getting it. There is no principal that I've ever known of that has said that. And if you have worked for one, then that is a bad principal. Please don't play this video for that principal. So anyway, the point is most principals are not going to say that. Most districts aren't going to say that. So it's a misunderstanding of the message. What we've done as teachers is we kind of take that message and we misconstrue it a little bit. It's nobody's fault. It's just what happens. So in international studies, when we talk about, because you always hear these studies about, oh, this country's doing better than us. The United States is 25th in this and 33rd in that and blah, 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 blah. When we actually look at those countries that are near the top, they don't cover nearly as much content as we do. And yet they perform better. Why? Because they are given, the way the teaching goes is drastically different. We tell them what we need them to know. We give them a little practice and we move on and we tell them something else they need to know. In other countries, they give them a problem. The students struggle with the problem. They try to work together to figure out what's going on with the problem. They break it down, and in the process of doing all that, before they're kind of guided to the correct answer, they learn many other concepts. They learn how to dissolve problems and figure out problems, which really is learning. And rather than being spoon-fed and then forgetting everything because it wasn't too hard to digest, what we need to do is we need to set students up by having them struggle a little bit. It's okay for students to struggle. I will tell you, I had several parents complain many times about me at the beginning of the year. They'd come in and say that I think this is too hard for my kid. My kid doesn't get this. And okay, trust me, they're not going to get an F for it. As long as they keep trying, they're going to be fine. And they had just trust me, bear with me. Eventually, they did. That being said, take a look at how people learn. This is actually the reason it's underlined. It's actually the name of a book. It's a very good book. If you haven't read it yet, it's something to take a look at. But the basis is that there are three important things that you need to make sure you hit when you really want people to learn, whether they're 5 or 55. And that is that all your students come with preconceptions. They come with what they think of as anything. For example, it could be a negative thing like math is hard. It could be a positive thing, or it could be just something that is very just wrong. They may think that they understand what trigonometry is, or what foreshadowing is, or any concept you think of, but they might actually have it backwards from something else. So they come in with preconceptions, understand that. Then what you need to do to develop competence, they have to have that foundational knowledge, yes, so we have to kind of help build that foundational knowledge. They have to then understand those facts in some sort of a framework and be able to make sense of them so that they can apply it, so that they can organize it for retrieval. So, and then the metacognitive approach is huge. Getting students to think about their thinking and getting them to take control of their own learning is huge for getting students to go through this. So anyway, the point of all of that is that this helps defeat that too much content to cover, because what you're doing is you're covering a whole lot of things that you never even thought you would by changing up how you're doing it a little bit. So let's kind of, I know it's hard to say, and I know that some of you are probably screaming at your computer right now, but try to get away from that, looking at those individual isolated skills as much as possible, and try to bundle again, put those things together so that you can hit more at one time. This one I was guilty of many times. I don't have time. This work is too hard. This takes too much. I have to sit here and I have to do all this work before I even teach. My gosh, I don't have time for that. Well, there's a few things that the authors have to say about that, and I actually add one that's not in the book in there. But here's some things when you hear the work is too hard, this is too much to do, I don't have time to do all this. First of all, unfortunately, and I say strongly, unfortunately, our profession is no longer revered like it used to be. And in fact, when you talk to anybody about teaching, they start spouting out lovely little sentence fragments like 3 months off, or 6 hours a day, or professional days off, or I could do that, or those who can do, those who can't teach. Those lovely little things, pensions, unions, all that good stuff. Unfortunately, we are at a crossroads with how society views what we do. So if we are talking about how we want students to learn, but we're not walking the talk, well, that kind of is a self-fulfilling prophecy then, and we will continue to see our profession bashed. We have to learn to walk the talk. If we really want students to do better, then we have to do better as well. And just working harder by doing the exact same things that you've always done, it's probably not going to fix anything. You can keep, it's just like if you get your car stuck in mud. You can hit that gas pedal and you can floor it all you want. Guess what? You're only going to sink deeper. You're not getting out. So we have to walk the talk, and we have to walk a little differently than we have in the past. Mental templating is really an important thing here. What you will probably notice, because for some of you, your first unit in UBD was probably excruciatingly difficult. Guess what? Unit 2, infinitely easier. Unit 3, even easier than that. And before you know it, you're not going to have to go back and keep looking up stuff in the textbook all the time, or looking at these movies, or whatever little notes you made throughout the course. You're going to have to refer to those less and less, because it's going to start coming to you naturally. And what you're going to start doing is you're going to start teaching and understanding without even realizing that that's what you're doing. Very important there. Working smarter using technology, this is kind of what I've talked about several times. Don't reinvent the wheel kind of thing. You're able to, you have a plethora of information at your fingertips through technology nowadays. Simply find stuff that will probably work with a few modifications, rather than trying to think, man, I got to start all over with this one, scrap this whole unit. A more important thing is, how often do we complain about our professional conversations, the weekly meetings, the professional development stuff? How often are we just sitting there going, oh, this is just brutal, I can't believe we have to sit through this again? What if our meetings were actually engaging? What if we actually had stuff to talk about? What if we started developing these units and say, hey, rather than this meeting, I'd like to get a small work group together to really enhance this unit so that we can really knock this out of the park. A lot of principals would probably be receptive to that. So imagine if you actually had meaningful, deep conversations and meetings that you're not having now. And then finally, the last one for me, this was the one I added in here, the trade-offs. What I learned, I tried to be that teacher that was always there for the kids. And what I would have is I'd have tutoring, I'd have these after school sessions, and I would do all these little things to kind of boost those kids and kind of get them caught up and this, that, and the other. And so what that did is it compounded the grading and meant that I was usually up till 11 or 12 o'clock every night grading. Well, guess what? Rather than reteaching and retesting and reworking and tutoring and all the stuff that we do all the time, which I know some of you listening right now do it all the time. What if you put that work into the front end? And imagine if they started understanding more. That would mean less reteaching, less grading, less of that stuff. Because what I found is, if I was able to write these units to where my lesson plans, I was actually evaluating them in class, and I could tell you right now who got it and who didn't. Not which student's going to get an A on the test, because that's totally different. We all can do that. But if I could tell you right now, that individual skill, those 3 didn't quite get it, those 6 didn't quite get it, those 2 didn't quite get it, and I could make modifications on the fly to work with them in the school day, I don't need to assign homework every single night. And what that means is, not only are the students happier, but I'm happier because I've got a real world picture right there of what they're able to do and what they're not, which means less grading. And then my time is also freed up because there's less tutoring. So there's a lot of trade-offs. What you're doing by having this work on the front end, you are saving infinitely more on the back end. So those are just some trade-offs. So all that said, what will you do? At the end of this course, you've really got 2 choices. You can continue to do what you did before this course. I'll never know. Keep doing what you need to do. Or you might choose to try this a little more. What I will say, some of you are going to come out of here, and there are always a few, those weird ones that are so pumped about this they want to just jump in and do everything right now with UBD. I would kind of advise you to be careful with that, because you don't want to burn yourself out on it. It's so easy to be gung-ho about something and then try to get in there and do it, but guess what? Real world punches you upside the head and you're just tired before you know it, and then you just kind of let it all go. I just can't do this, and you slip into that misconception of, I don't have enough time. Take it piecemeal, do a little bit at a time. Use that summer vacation which is more like 6 weeks, not 10 or 12 or whatever people think. Use those few weeks you get over the summer maybe to kind of leisurely do a little bit at a time, and I think you'll see dramatic results. That being said, this is the last time you're going to hear my voice, so I thank you for all of your work this semester. I hope this has been beneficial. I hope that my videos haven't bored you, and I hope that you feel free to come back and visit them at any time. If there's anything I can do for you going forward, please don't hesitate to let me know. Good luck. You're going to be submitting your final units. Please make sure that you have included other things that I've suggested that you may have missed before you turn in that final unit. Also, wait till you get your colleagues' feedback before you submit your entire unit, because you just want to make sure you take the time to do it correctly. So that's 100 points. Can really make or break you. So good luck. Have a great rest of your semester. Great break, and I wish you the very best going forward.